The swinging 60s didn't just give us spy thrillers dripping with danger and style, it gave us some of the wildest spoofs ever to hit the big screen. These weren't just imitations. They were colorful, chaotic explosions of comedy that mocked James Bond while creating their own bizarre legends. But here's the twist. Many of them bombed at the time, only to rise from the ashes as cult treasures. Which psychedelic oddball is still influencing spy spoofs today? Let's dive in. Our Man Flint, 1966. Imagine if James Bond had a cooler cousin who traded martinis for groovy swagger. That's Derek Flint. Played by James Coburn, Our Man Flint was a spy spoof that didn't just parody the Bond formula. It reinvented it with psychedelic confidence. Coburn's Flint wasn't just a secret agent. He was a Renaissance man, expert in martial arts, fluent in multiple languages, and capable of performing feats so exaggerated they veered into cartoon territory. The film leaned hard into absurd gadgetry, giving Flint everything from a lighter that doubled as a missile to a wardrobe packed with tricks that would make even Q blush. The villains? A shadowy organization literally trying to control the weather, a plot that was equal parts silly and surprisingly forward-thinking. But the real spark of the film came from Coburn himself. His laid-back, too-cool-to-care persona set him apart from Sean Connery's tightly wound Bond, giving audiences a hero who smirked at the chaos instead of sweating through it. Critics at the time weren't entirely sold. Some thought the film was too farcical, too tongue-in-cheek for a world still taking its spies semi-seriously. But decades later, its colorful sets, groovy music, and self-aware humor turned it into a late-night cult classic. Modern viewers see it less as a parody and more as a time capsule of 60 seconds cool, when spy cinema didn't need to play it straight to leave a mark. What makes Our Man Flint endure is its balance between mockery and admiration. It poked fun at Bond, but it also showed how elastic the genre could be. Without Flint paving the way, later spoofs like Austin Powers might never have had a blueprint. Today, Coburn's smirk, the outrageous gadgets, and the audacious weather control plot make Our Man Flint one of the most charmingly ridiculous spy comedies ever made. In Like Flint, 1967, sequels are tricky. Go too safe, and you bore your audience. Go too wild, and you lose them entirely. In Like Flint, the follow-up to Our Man Flint chose the second option, and the result was pure cult gold. James Coburn returned as Derek Flint, now facing a bizarre conspiracy involving women taking over world governments. Yes, you heard that right. An all-female cabal plotting to seize power, played both for satire and camp excess. The film pushed its tongue-in-cheek vibe even further than its predecessor, from lunar shenanigans to underwater hideouts. In Like Flint wasn't just parodying Bond anymore, it was parodying itself. The production doubled down on the psychedelic visuals, with candy-colored sets that looked ripped straight out of a pop art dream. Coburn, once again, carried the chaos with effortless charisma. Unlike Connery's Bond, who approached danger with grit, Coburn's Flint treated every scenario like a minor inconvenience between ski trips and gourmet meals. He didn't just save the day, he did it while making the whole spy game look like a stylish inside joke. Critics groaned at the over-the-top plot lines, calling them absurd and incoherent. But cult audiences decades later found exactly that absurdity to be the film's charm. What once looked like a messy cash-in now plays like a psychedelic fever dream, one that captured the anything-goes spirit of the late 60 seconds better than many serious spy films. The kicker? In Like Flint embraced themes that, while exaggerated, tapped into real cultural shifts of the era. Women's liberation, distrust of institutions, and space-age optimism all got filtered through this candy-colored satire. That made it not just goofy entertainment, but an accidental time capsule of a society in flux. While it didn't rake in Bond-sized profits, In Like Flint carved out its own legacy. Today, it sits alongside its predecessor as proof that sometimes the best spoofs don't hold back. They run full tilt into absurdity. Casino Royale, 1967. If chaos had a passport, it would be stamped Casino Royale. This 1967 oddity was billed as a Bond spoof, but it quickly spiraled into one of the strangest productions of the decade. Instead of a sleek spy thriller, audiences got a kaleidoscope of tones, part comedy, part satire, part psychedelic circus, that baffled critics and delighted cult fans years later. The film's premise sounds simple. James Bond, played by David Niven, comes out of retirement to face off against the nefarious Le Chiffre, but the production couldn't settle on one direction. so they didn't. Instead, they hired multiple directors, including John Huston and even Val Guest, and each brought a different flavor. Add in a sprawling cast that featured Peter Sellers, Ursula Andress, Orson Welles, and Woody Allen, and you had a project with too many cooks in the kitchen. Sellers and Welles reportedly clashed so badly that they refused to appear on set together, forcing editors to stitch scenes together like mismatched puzzle pieces. The result was a film that feels more like a patchwork of sketches than a coherent narrative. But here's the twist. That very mess is what gives Casino Royale its enduring cult appeal. The sets are drenched in 60 seconds psychedelia. The costumes are outrageous, and the humor veers from slapstick to absurdist wordplay. Audiences at the time didn't know what to make of it. Some laughed, others groaned, many simply left confused. But decades later, fans of offbeat cinema rediscovered it as a glorious train wreck of spy comedy excess. What's wild is that despite its uneven reception, the movie raked in money at the box office. People wanted to see what all the fuss was about, and while official Bond producers pretended it didn't exist, Casino Royale became the forbidden cousin in the Bond family tree, too weird to ignore, too strange to forget. Today, it stands as proof that sometimes a cinematic disaster can transform into a cult treasure. If you want a spy film that feels like a surreal party where no one's in charge, Casino Royale is your ticket. The President's Analyst, 1967. What happens when your therapist knows too much? That's the genius hook of The President's Analyst, a spy comedy that was far sharper than audiences were ready for in 1967. James Coburn, yes, again, played a psychiatrist tapped to counsel the President of the United States. But the job comes with a dangerous side effect. Every intelligence agency in the world wants a piece of him. The film starts as a cheeky spoof of spy tropes, but quickly veers into wild satire of Cold War paranoia. Coburn's character becomes the most wanted man on Earth, chased not only by rival nations but also by a sinister corporation known only as the Phone Company. Yes, the villain was the telecommunications industry itself, a jab so daring that some speculate it limited the movie's distribution. Tonally, the film is all over the map, and that's its charm. One moment it's slapstick, the next it's biting political commentary, and before you know it, you're watching a sequence that plays like proto-sci-fi paranoia. Critics at the time didn't know how to classify it. Some dismissed it as too chaotic, while others praised its ambition. Over time, though, audiences began to realize just how ahead of its time it was. Its commentary on surveillance, corporate power, and government overreach feels almost prophetic today, and Coburn's dry, offbeat performance, so different from his action hero roles, has aged like fine wine. If our Man Flint made fun of spy gadgets, The President's Analyst made fun of the entire system behind them. And, in doing so, it carved out a unique place in spy comedy history, one that still resonates in the age of smartphones and mass data collection. Modesty Blaze, 1966. Before superheroes dominated the big screen, there was Modesty Blaze, a Technicolor spy adventure based on the British comic strip. Starring Monica Vitti as the glamorous secret agent, the film embraced absurd camp to such a degree that it became almost impossible to take seriously. And that, oddly enough, is why it survived as a cult classic. At the time, the studio wanted to create a female-led alternative to James Bond, and on paper, it had all the right ingredients. Vitti's Modesty was a master of disguise, quick-witted, and always one step ahead of her enemies. She was paired with Terence Stamp as her sidekick and Dirk Bogarde as a flamboyant villain. Throw in psychedelic costumes, candy-colored sets, and a swinging London backdrop, and you had the recipe for a stylish romp. But here's the catch. The movie leaned so hard into parody that it alienated audiences who expected a straightforward thriller. Critics complained that it was incoherent, more interested in being groovy than telling a story. It flopped at the box office, with reviewers scratching their heads at its campy tone. Fast forward a few decades, and Modesty Blaze looks less like a failure and more like a vibrant time capsule of mid-60 seconds pop culture. The costumes and set design are jaw-dropping, the humor knowingly silly, and Vitti, though not a traditional action star, plays the role with playful irony. Modern audiences now see it as a parody hiding in plain sight, a wink at the spy craze that was already starting to wear thin by 1966. Cult fans especially love it for how unashamedly weird it island. While Bond films of the era played their cards close to the chest, Modesty Blaze threw glitter at the genre and danced away. Today, it's celebrated not as a rival to 007, but as a camp masterpiece that dared to be strange and succeeded in being unforgettable. The Silencers, 1966. When Dean Martin signed on to play super spy Matt Helm in The Silencers, audiences knew they weren't getting James Bond. They were getting Bond through a smoky lounge haze, and that's exactly why the film hit cult status years later. Martin, already a Rat Pack legend, approached the spy game with a glass in hand, a wink in his eye, and a casualness that made 007 look uptight. The Silencers introduced Helm as a government agent tasked with stopping a doomsday plot, but the details hardly mattered. The real fun came from watching Dino glide through scenes with effortless charm. Instead of cold-blooded intensity, you got martini-dry humor. Instead of heart-pounding action, you got campy gadgetry and over-the-top villains. The movie even leaned into musical numbers, making it feel like part spy spoof, part nightclub act. Critics at the time rolled their eyes. To them, Martin was phoning it in, turning espionage into a variety show. But audiences bought tickets anyway, especially fans who wanted the glamour of Bond without the seriousness. Decades later, those same elements critics mocked became the very reasons The Silencers aged into cult territory. The movie captured the mid-60-second sweet spot where spy mania was everywhere, from TV shows like Get Smart to comic books. Dino's Helm wasn't a rival to Bond. He was the cool uncle poking fun at him. And the film's candy-colored visuals, cheeky humor, and overstuffed gadgets make it an irresistible retro time capsule today. If James Bond was a sharp suit and a straight face, Matt Helm was a cocktail glass and a laugh track. And The Silencers made sure you never forgot which party you'd rather attend. Murderers Row, 1966. By the time Murderers Row hit theaters, Dean Martin's Matt Helm was already carving out his own niche. This sequel dialed everything up. Brighter colors, bigger gadgets, and even wilder plots. Helm goes head-to-head with a villain bent on destroying Washington with, you guessed it, a giant laser. Yes, it's as outrageous as it sounds. Anne Margaret joined the cast, bringing infectious energy that practically stole the show. Her presence added a rock and roll vibe that made the whole production feel like a spy spoof wrapped inside a pop concert. The pairing of Martin and Anne Margaret gave the movie more youthful spark than its predecessor, and audiences loved their chemistry. The plot? Thin as tissue paper. The villain's scheme was just an excuse for flashy set pieces, chase scenes, and tongue-in-cheek gags. What critics saw as sloppy storytelling, cult fans later embraced as self-aware parody. After all, who was really watching these films for coherent espionage? It was about the ride, not the roadmap. What made Murderers Row stand out was its shameless embrace of camp. Dino crooned between explosions, Anne Margaret danced through danger, and the production design bathed everything in kaleidoscopic color. It was spy cinema through the lens of Vegas entertainment, and that mix is exactly why it still works as kitsch gold today. Where Bond leaned into grit, Helm leaned into glitz, and Murderers Row made sure the audience had a smile plastered on their face long after the credits rolled. The Ambushers, 1967. By the third Matt Helm movie, you'd think the formula might start to crack. Instead, the Ambushers doubled down on absurdity, producing one of the most outlandish spy comedies of the decade. The plot revolved around a hijacked experimental flying saucer, a premise so wild it felt like a Saturday morning cartoon disguised as a feature film. Dean Martin slipped into Helm's shoes with the same laid-back charm, barely breaking a sweat as chaos erupted around him. Critics accused him of sleepwalking through the role, but that's precisely what made it work. Helm wasn't a spy. He was a crooner who happened to wander into espionage. The gadgets grew sillier, the villains hammier, and the innuendo thicker than ever. If The Silencers had been a cheeky spoof and Murderers Row a colorful joyride, The Ambushers was pure parody, cranked up to 11. Audiences who expected a serious thriller were baffled, but those who leaned into the camp got exactly what they wanted. What's fascinating about The Ambushers is how it perfectly reflects late 60 seconds pop culture. UFO mania, psychedelic visuals, and distrust of authority all found their way into the script, wrapped in a package that never once asked you to take it seriously. Over time, that blend of kitsch and absurdity made it a cult darling, celebrated for its sheer audacity. Today, it's less about whether the movie worked and more about how fearlessly it embraced being ridiculous. The Ambushers may not have reinvented the spy genre, but it proved that sometimes the best cult films are the ones that lean hardest into their own chaos. The Wrecking Crew, 1968. By the time The Wrecking Crew arrived, Dean Martin's Matt Helm series was running on pure lounge energy. This fourth and final installment leaned into its camp roots harder than ever, but it's remembered today for something far more poignant. It featured Sharon Tate in one of her most charming roles. The plot was classic Helm nonsense. A shipment of gold vanishes, villains hatch elaborate schemes, and Helm stumbles his way through espionage with martinis and quips. But Tate's presence, as the delightfully clumsy Freya Carlson, lifted the film. She brought a playful innocence that contrasted beautifully with Martin's laid-back swagger, and modern audiences often view the movie through the lens of her tragically short career. Action-wise, The Wrecking Crew had its moments. The fight choreography, handled in part by a young Bruce Lee, added a surprising dose of physicality. It's ironic. While Martin barely lifted a finger, Lee was behind the camera crafting moves that would later inspire martial arts cinema. That hidden detail alone makes the film fascinating for fans digging through history. Critics were brutal. They called it formulaic, silly, even lazy. And yes, by the fourth round, the Matt Helm formula was showing cracks. But what they missed was how these films were never about reinventing espionage. They were about capturing the carefree, colorful vibe of the era. Today, cult fans celebrate The Wrecking Crew for its campy humor, psychedelic sets, and as a time capsule of Tate's undeniable screen presence. It's not Bond. It's not even trying to be. It's Dino and friends throwing one last glitter-soaked party before spy mania fizzled out. The Spy with a Cold Nose, 1966. Some spy comedies are remembered for their suave leads or dazzling gadgets. The Spy with a Cold Nose is remembered for a dog. Yes, this quirky British comedy revolved around a bulldog fitted with a hidden listening device and sent on an espionage mission. Ridiculous? Absolutely. But that's what made it unforgettable. The film starred Lawrence Harvey as a vet dragged into the absurd plot, with Lionel Jeffries and Delia Lavi rounding out the cast. The very premise played like a satire of Cold War paranoia. If humans couldn't be trusted, why not turn to man's best friend? Watching Harvey try to maintain dignity while tending to a four-legged secret agent is where the comedy truly soared. Critics at the time didn't quite know what to do with it. Was it family comedy? Satire? Straight parody? Audiences were equally confused, and the movie quietly slipped through the cracks. Yet, like many oddball 60 Seconds projects, its sheer weirdness earned it a second life decades later. Fans of cult cinema now celebrate it for being so unabashedly silly. It took the spy craze to its most absurd extreme and proved that not every espionage tale needed to be about world domination and slick tuxedos. Sometimes, it could just be about a bulldog with a microphone. The Spy with a Cold Nose may not have the star power of a Bond parody or the flash of a Matt Helm film, but in its small, bizarre way, it carved out a cult reputation as one of the strangest spy comedies ever put to screen. Carry On Spying, 1964. Long before Austin Powers made a career out of parodying Bond, the British Carry On team got there first. Carry On Spying, the ninth film in the long-running comedy franchise, gleefully skewered spy mania at its peak. And it did so with slapstick, puns, and performances so broad you could spot them from space. The plot, as usual with Carry On films, was paper thin. A group of bumbling British agents set out to stop a criminal organization known as STENCH. Yes, that was the actual name. The humor relied on wordplay, ridiculous disguises, and pratfalls that pushed the spy genre to cartoonish levels. While James Bond was seducing femme fatales and blowing up volcano layers, Carry On Spying had agents tripping over furniture and misplacing top-secret documents. It was lowbrow humor by design, and British audiences loved it. The movie marked the first appearance of Barbara Windsor in the franchise, adding even more cheeky charm to the mix. Critics, however, weren't as kind. Some dismissed it as juvenile nonsense, while others argued it was too lightweight even by Carry On standards. But over time, fans began to treasure it as one of the more inventive entries, thanks to its playful parody of Bond tropes at the height of spy fever. Today, it stands as a cult favorite for those who appreciate its unapologetically silly humor. It didn't try to compete with 007, it laughed at him. And in doing so, it captured the uniquely British ability to puncture pomposity with slapstick. Carry On Spying may not have been slick, but it was a reminder that sometimes laughter was the best countermeasure. Salt and Pepper, 1968. By the late 60 seconds, spy spoofs had gone in every direction imaginable. Psychedelic, campy, and downright bizarre. But Salt and Pepper brought something different to the mix. Rat Pack Cool, starring Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford, this buddy comedy mashed espionage with nightclub swagger, turning the spy genre into a swinging Vegas-style party. Davis and Lawford played nightclub owners in London who accidentally stumble into an espionage plot involving political assassinations and international intrigue. Instead of suave secret agents, the heroes here were ordinary guys thrust into chaos, relying on wit, slapstick, and sheer luck to survive. The movie wasn't just about parodying spies, it was about watching two entertainers riff off each other while London became their playground. What really made Salt and Pepper stand out was Davis himself. Known for his musical talent and Rat Pack persona, he brought lightning-fast timing and charisma that lifted every scene. Lawford, the smoother, straight man, balanced Davis's energy, creating a dynamic that felt fresh compared to the stiff upper lips of traditional spy heroes. The humor leaned broad. Expect pratfalls, mistaken identities, and nightclub brawls, but it was drenched in that late 60 seconds atmosphere of swinging London, flashy costumes, neon lights, and a soundtrack dripping with cool. Critics were lukewarm, dismissing it as lightweight fluff, but cult audiences later embraced it for exactly that. Decades on, Salt and Pepper is remembered less for its plot and more for its vibe. It's a film that captures an era when spy spoofs weren't about saving the world, they were about style, laughs, and hanging out with stars who knew how to own a room. And in that sense, it succeeded. So, there you have it. 12 spy comedy curios from the 60s that once baffled audiences but now sparkle as cult treasures. They were loud, colorful, messy, and unashamedly weird, and that's exactly why they last. Which of these forgotten gems do you think deserves a modern revival? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic deep dives. The world of retro spy spoofs is just getting started.